I too, like basically everyone else, have watched Heartstopper at 2 a.m. in one sitting. Thanks for asking. So this video is very much last minute as I hadn't planned on making it at all. Since I basically only watch Asian dramas now, I'm very much unaware of what goes on in Western drama land, which I used to be a part of until a couple of years ago. But sometimes some shows are simply too popular for me not to hear about them and watch them. And that was the case for Heartstopper. Of course, I can never say no to a good LGBTQ plus romance, can I? So this video is gonna be pretty different in both its content because I usually only talk about Asian anti-dramas, but this video is also special in its execution because I watched the show from 2 to 5 a.m, then woke up at 2 p.m. the next day, wrote the script, and I'm now filming this video the day after in the hopes of being able to edit it and post it on Saturday. So rushed is very much the theme here. But the reason I'm making this video is still very much in line with the rest of my content, because it is about the fact that while I was watching Heartstopper, I couldn't help but feel like it was just a BL show, but for Westerners. Let's talk about it. What I liked. So firstly, I still want this video to kind of be a review of the show as well. And what I can say is that I really liked it. The only Western shows that I'm still starting now are all queer shows. Like this one, Young Royals, and Love Victor. And I gotta say that I like all three shows, though for me Young Royals is by far the best. But also one thing that these three shows also have in common with BL, besides centering men-loving men-love stories in their plot, is also the fact that those stories are always about queer men, whereas queer women still have yet to get their own rom-com. So I really did enjoy Heartstopper. I think it's a very quirky show. I really like the aesthetic and world building for it. I enjoyed the characters tremendously. I think the story was very well written and executed. The acting was very good, the chemistry was great. Overall, there's no denying that it's just a good show. My favorite thing about it, which it definitely does better than BL shows, that's for sure, or even Young Royals and Love Victor, is the diversity. Apart from one character that I will talk about in a minute, this show makes it a point to not only represent a white men-loving men-love story like we've seen 100 times before, but has multiple characters of colors, including a trans woman, features a lesbian couple who actually gets a storyline, which as a BL viewer very much shook me to my core. What do you mean shows that center queer men can also acknowledge the existence of queer women? BL shows can't relate. So it's definitely much more diverse and woke than BL shows. I'm not trying to make a perfect comparison between the two. So while this show is really a step in the right direction, because finally it includes a lot of diversity, queer friendships, it's still interesting to see that the front-running couple of the show is the men-loving men one. And the women-loving womenship is never as loved, as front and center as the men-loving menship. And there's a lot of things to say about that in my opinion, which is why I will make a full video on the fact that women are very often excluded from queer representation or really delegated to the backseat. But anyways, back to Heartstopper, I really also enjoyed the fact that the token straight character, his words not mine, is more feminine than most and very comfortable in his masculinity, which is really groundbreaking. Also, side note, but Tao is my absolute favorite. I'm incredibly partial to goofy characters who are always 100% themselves, so I had to stand. So overall, lots of things to love, and personally seeing Nick figure out his bisexuality was really beautiful in how truthful it resonated with me, and I especially loved how they portrayed him taking the time to figure it out, and not just him waking up to the realization that he's bi. I found it very relatable and especially important since this show is made for teens to show that these things take time, and it's not only about sexuality, it's about every little detail that makes you yourself. And I just love Nick a lot as a character. I mean, him and Tao, my babes. And Nick, even though, let's be honest, he seems a little basic and boring at first, frankly, both him and Charlie are kind of those perfect, boring, vanilla characters. He really was developed super well by the show. And in fact, he was developed developed a lot more than Charlie, who kind of only ends up being reduced to his love story. But yeah, this ship worked a lot more than I expected from the first episode, considering their more basic personalities, but the plot largely compensated for it, and it actually made for an incredibly healthy and communicating ship, which I always appreciate. It kind of made me think of Poon and No from Lovesick, which is one of my favorite BL shows of all time. It's not the best, but I just love Poon and No so much. And honestly, the struggles that they face in Lovesick are kind of similar to the Heartstopper ones, especially since it also deals with a hidden relationship. All the while, Poon and No are very healthy and communicative with each other, which really reminds me of Heartstopper. Or more recently, there's also Mark and Tawan from My Ride. They should be a little more boring because they're kind of perfect, smooth character like the characters in Heartstopper, yet they just worked really well, were really healthy, and developed a really, really beautiful relationship. So being perfect and basic isn't really that bad if it means that the ship is that healthy. What I didn't like. So I'm very well aware that this show is based off of a comic, but I haven't read the original material, so I'm really just judging the series on its own. And I gotta say that the little illustrations that are added to the footage, most of the time were really cute and kind of evoked really well the comic, but other times it could be really distracting. So when the little leaves and others were added to location shots, title cards, and even some scenes featuring their hands to show the excitement of touching each other were really, really well done and actually made the show stand out. But in other scenes it was a little more distracting, especially the more important scenes like the kiss scenes. I didn't love it. I feel like they could have scaled it back a tiny bit, and it would have been much better in my opinion. Secondly, as I said, this show is very diverse, yet the only plus size character, Isaac, is the only character of the show who frankly, narratively serves no purpose. Once again, I haven't read the original comic, and even if Isaac was exactly like that in the comic, I feel like they should have changed it. Because I do find it a bit insulting that a show that strives to represent so many different identities, of course, would forget about the plus size character. I mean, it's very relatable because that's what happens to us in a world that hates us, but still. It's very sad that Isaac is literally a second thought, and he is also the only character with no love story. And once again, I don't know the comics, so maybe he's asexual, but I think it's very important to represent plus size people as having love stories because it's just so rare. Isaac has literally 3 lines in the whole show, and he's always in the background just reading his book, having no importance on the plot whatsoever. And for a show that so clearly tried to hit so many amazing points in terms of representation, this one kind of hurts. And finally, I think a lot of people are gonna disagree with me on that, but I felt like the homophobia and bullying felt kind of dated. When the show started, I really wondered how it could last 8 episodes when it was so clear that Nick and Charlie liked each other from the first episode. And what made the plot a little more complex than just 2 guys who like each other is homophobia. And I want to make it clear that I totally understand that despite having made a lot of progress in terms of LGBTQ plus representation and acceptance in the world, there is still a long way to go and homophobia is still rampant. But when Charlie says he's the only out gay guy in his whole school, and that Tara and Darcy are the only out lesbians in theirs, in the UK, I'm sorry but I struggle to believe it. I know I come from a very gay city, Paris, but like still, I don't think the UK are very much different in terms of LGBTQ plus inhabitants than France. And nowadays, 1 in 6 teenagers identifies as LGBTQ plus. So you're gonna tell me that there is only 1 out gay guy in the whole school? In the UK? I don't know, I really struggle to imagine it, and I think it's something that Young Royals and Love Victor did much better. In Young Royals, which is not really realistic because he's literally a queer prince, Willem is pressured in all areas of his life due to his royal status, so it does make sense that such a conservative institution wouldn't be very accepting of an LGBTQ plus prince. And for Love Victor, contrarily to Simon in Love Simon, who came from a very liberal and accepting family, Victor comes from a very religious immigrant family, which he states is the reason reason why he hasn't accepted himself. Seeing how religious the United States are, I think a lot of people could relate to Victor. And the tension felt very real because the church versus the LGBTQ+ community is a very discussed topic nowadays. But for Heartstopper, I didn't really connect with it as much. Like, once again, I'm not saying you can be closeted, bullied, or in a generally homophobic environment in 2022, but it felt a little too much, too caricatural for me to truly believe it. Third homo being bullied in 29 in Glee made sense for the time. Here, not so much. I feel like Nick, as a character who hangs out with the boys, who's very stereotypically straight, struggling to accept his sexuality made a lot of sense even without the homophobic bullying happening. I just think a slightly more subtle bullying and also other out queer people in the school would have made the show more realistic and I would have connected more with it. Especially since the poor gay dude gets bullied trope has been done hundreds of times before. But that being said, I also think that my opinion on that aspect is greatly influenced by the fact that I'm a BL fan who watches a new men-loving men rom-com literally every week, in which the characters almost always never face any type of homophobia or even struggle to figure out their identity. So my views of it is probably slightly deformed. Still would have preferred a little more nuance though. BL but mainstream. Speaking of BL, let's get to the point of this video, shall we? And it's about the fact that I saw this show get praised for being groundbreaking, while when I was watching it, I was like, yeah, I've seen this 50 times before in BL shows. And this is not to say that Heartstopper isn't groundbreaking, in fact it very much is. To have an LGBTQ+ rom-com with so much diversity, tackling so many compelling topics, is just really important. But it makes it so much clearer to me why I'm a BL fan. I will make a video on why BL is so popular one day, but probably the main answer for that is the fact that there is no other genre on earth that produces queer romance series at such a prolific rate. And yeah, BL started as something for straight fangirls, but it has evolved into something so much bigger. Because it now contains shows that feature coming out stories like I Told Sunset About You, Love by Chance, and He's Coming to Me. But also shows that ranges from queer vigilantes taking an evil politician down, like Not Me, to the silliest of rom-coms. The BL genre is constantly evolving, and that's why despite all of its flaws, and anyone in the fandom knows there's a lot, it is still such a groundbreaking and interesting genre that I can never really see myself pulling away from. And so when I say that only now, in 2022, the West has finally gotten a show like Heartstopper, whereas Asia has been producing those kinds of shows for almost a decade now, it does feel a little off-putting, not gonna lie. Because shows like Heartstopper, Love Victor, and Young Royals are the equivalent of BL shows, where the man-loving man love story is 100% the main storyline, but made in the West with much more mainstream companies like Netflix and Hulu. Therefore, they reach a much bigger audience, which is why Heartstopper has been everywhere on social media, and arguably as much if not even more revolutionary and important show like Not Me isn't. And so the point of this video is very simple. Firstly, I hope rom-com series just make a comeback in the West, because as I said in my Why Asian romances are better than Western ones video, there's simply not many pure rom-com shows. And romance ends up almost always being the subplot for a much bigger story. Which is kinda sad because love deserves to be the main plot of a story, you know? Especially in a society that is so obsessed with love like ours. And it's personally a reason why I love Thai drama so much, because they give me the pure, unadulterated romantic shows that I'm craving. And so far I've only seen men-loving men stories get romantic shows in the West. Probably because there is this coming out and coming into yourself underlying trope that attracts producers more than a straight show that doesn't have quite those themes. So yeah, I'd just like to see more rom-coms in general, but especially queer ones. I think it's time for queer women to get a rom-com where they're front and center too. And that's why I'm very excited for the Thai GL show, Gap, the series that's coming out very soon. And the second part of my point is that it makes me very sad how overlooked queer Asian dramas are. Because yes, while some don't consider BL LGBTQ+ shows, the countries that produce BL shows rarely ever have a distinction between BL shows and LGBTQ plus series. So I do personally consider BL an LGBTQ plus show because that's what the people who created those shows think as well. Especially considering the BL fandom is more and more composed of LGBTQ plus people. So yeah, I just wish Asian dramas and especially Asian queer dramas would get more love. Especially incredible shows like I Thought Sunset About You, Not Me, and Three Will Be Free. I just can't help but imagine how life-changing it would be to so many people for this show to be released on major platforms like Netflix and finally get the love they deserve. But it will come one day, I'm sure of it. Until then though, guess the only mainstream shows will have to be Western shows about Western characters. To conclude, Heartstopper was a really nice show that I binge watched in 3 hours and a half, and I have no regrets. But I also couldn't help but notice the similarities it had with the BL genre, making me happy that queer rom-coms are finally starting to be a thing in the West as well, and meeting quite a lot of success, but also sad that the same energy can be replicated for queer Asian dramas. I hope you enjoyed this last minute video. I'll see you next time and have a great day.